Questions. Dr. Wittes, you had mentioned earlier, and I want to come back to this. Merkel has just asked that safe zones be discussed again with the potential of no-fly zone support and so forth. That didn't seem to be very viable earlier when they were discussed. What would make that more workable today? I visited with refugees personally in Jordan, also in the Nizip camp near Gaziantep in Turkey, and also I've seen them in the refugee pipeline up in Serbia. In my opinion, these people do not want to leave their country. They want to stay there, but obviously the conditions there are so bad they've been forced to. I have one question about that in terms of, quickly, if you can respond to, is it now possible, given the failure of this first attempt at cessation of hostilities, is it now not an opportunity to go back and revisit safe zone opportunity?
If we see a cessation of hostilities as not only a way to reduce human suffering, but also a way to work toward the end of conflict, then it's clearly preferable as a first step than safe zones. And I think that they're taking another go at it. I don't think they've given up yet. But if, in fact, those parties in Vienna cannot agree to a meaningful ceasefire, then I think pressure for safe zones will grow. And we've seen that what the Europeans have done, trying to restrict the flow through Turkey, is only having limited impact. We see Syrians now going into North Africa to try and cross the Mediterranean and get into Europe that way. So they are searching for a solution to this problem.
Second question, on Russia. You mentioned Russia earlier. It sure seems to me that they have a long-term interest in Syria, not Bashar al-Assad. With what they've done in the air base at Latakia and in the naval base at Tortoise, they look like they're there permanently. This fits in very well with their strategy in Crimea as well. So what is the long-term role that they play? They certainly have not come to the realization and agreement that Bashar al-Assad has to go. How do they play into where we go from here, honestly?
You know, I think the administration has spent the last 4 years trying to persuade the Russians to shift their position in Syria without success. And that leads me to a similar conclusion to the one that Ambassador Ford gave in his testimony, which is that they are either unable or unwilling. And I'm honestly not sure it could be a bit of both, because the Syrians also have very robust Iranian backing that is directed at saving Bashar al-Assad. Now, for the Russians, it's about a place at the table. It's about having a state rather than state collapse, because they believe that's what will enable Sunni extremism to migrate in their direction, as well as about preserving those assets that you described. So in theory, it's possible to arrive at a solution that meets their needs. I just don't see a lot of willingness on their part to move there in practice.
Ambassador, you mentioned several things you would have us do in terms of dealing with the refugees. What would you have us do politically to encourage a ceasefire and really to move toward the removal of Bashar al-Assad, which is our position right now? And are we ever going to be willing to give up on that? I hope we won't. But what is our position now relative to the cessation of, or the failure of the cessation of hostilities? What would be your recommendation right now in terms of our position vis-a-vis a renewed round of negotiations relative to a ceasefire? Or you've mentioned the military side as well, but would you respond to that?
Very briefly, Senator. With respect to a cessation of hostilities, obviously the United States wants it. There are modalities I mentioned about accountability and penalizing people who are determined responsible for violations. The broader goal of solving the Syrian crisis, the American strategy has always been to get to a negotiated solution between Syrians. I think that makes sense, but we've never had tactics to achieve that strategy. And it's very clear to me that unless there's a great deal more military pressure on Bashar al-Assad, he will not make substantial compromises.
And where would that pressure come from in your
Well, the pressure needs to come from armed opposition groups on the ground. Let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. Senator, in July of 2015, President Assad, in a national speech in Syria, said our forces are tired, We're having to withdraw from towns and cities that we don't want to withdraw from, but we have to because we don't have enough soldiers. People are not signing up for the army. They're running away from national service. They need to stay. His entire demeanor was very downbeat. That was last July.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but you got the Kurdish YPG and the SOC have terrible relationships. I mean, where is this opposition going to really come from?
As I was saying, Senator, last July, Assad himself was admitting that his forces were losing on the battlefield.
That was a year ago, and they're still...
Well, that was 9 months ago, before the Russians intervened. After the Russian intervention, then to me, the logical thing, we were talking a moment ago about Iran, which has ground forces in Syria. In order to get them to negotiate, they will have to feel more pain. And so, but I don't want American forces to do that. I think there are fighters on the ground that can do that.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr.